The night was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the world is holding its breath for something it isn't ready to witness. And somewhere inside one of Japan's most fortified prisons, a prisoner lay awake, eyes open in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of fluorescent lights. He wasn't waiting for morning. He wasn't waiting for guards. He wasn't waiting for freedom to be granted. He was waiting for the exact second he could take it for himself. His name was Yoshie Shiratori, a man who, by all accounts, should have been broken by now. He had been betrayed, beaten, starved, humiliated, and imprisoned for crimes he insisted he did not commit. But the most extraordinary thing about him wasn't his strength, his endurance, or even his determination. It was something rarer, something far more dangerous. He simply refused to stay in a cage. The cold walls of Aomori prison had seen countless inmates pass through, but none like him. Shiratori had the kind of patience that could outlast storms, the kind of observation skills that noticed what others didn't, and the kind of mind that looked at iron bars, locked doors, and steel chains, not as obstacles, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. That night, he studied the guards as they performed their rounds. Their footsteps carried a rhythm he had memorized long ago. One set of boots dragged slightly. One guard coughed every few minutes. Another jingled his keys absent-mindedly as he walked. Tiny details, but to Shiratori, they were the heartbeat of the enemy. He knew when they paused. He knew when they turned. He knew when they were distracted. And he knew when the prison slept. The metal cuffs around his wrists were old, rusted. The cell door was secured by a lock that had been repaired too many times. And the single window above, small enough to break bones if anyone tried to squeeze through, was framed by bars that had never once been checked for corrosion. Everything the prison believed was secure, he saw differently. He waited until the guards' shift changed, when their attention slipped for a moment, when the night air outside was cold enough to tighten metal, and when the silence felt almost unnatural. Then, with a calmness that did not match the danger, he reached into his sleeve. A thin piece of wire. A wire he had stolen, hidden, and reshaped over days. One that would never appear on a report because no one ever thought a man like him could notice something that small or use it with the precision he had learned through a lifetime of surviving. He inserted the wire into the lock. Every second mattered. Every sound was a threat, and every breath felt louder than it should have been. But the lock surrendered with a soft click. Shiratori didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He only pushed the door slowly, silently, until the cold hallway revealed itself like a forbidden path. For the first time in years, he wasn't separated from the world by steel. But this was only the beginning. The narrow corridors of the prison twisted like a maze. Guards patrolled unpredictably. Floors creaked, and even the shadows felt dangerous. But Shiratori didn't move like a desperate man. He moved like a hunter, slow, careful, focused. He had studied every inch of this place. He knew which floors were loose, which corners were blind, and which guard had a habit of staring at the ceiling during his rounds. He even knew where the kitchen staff stored their knives and how early they arrived each morning. His escape wasn't built on luck. It was built on obsession.
But the true challenge waited deeper within the prison, a metal ventilation shaft barely wider than a human ribcage. Anyone else would see it as impossible, but to Shiratori, it was the only path the guards would never consider. The shaft scraped against his skin as he pulled himself inside. The metal was cold, biting, and every inch forward demanded a sacrifice of breath. Darkness pressed against his chest. Dust filled his lungs, but he didn't stop. He didn't panic. He didn't allow fear to win. The world outside was getting closer. Outside the shaft, guards talked, laughed, argued. A radio buzzed somewhere nearby. If anyone so much as looked up, they would see him, half buried in the metal skeleton of the building, but they didn't. His silence was absolute. At last he reached the end of the passage. A final grate separated him from the outside world. The screws were old, the metal was weak, and with a strength born not from muscle but from desperation, he forced it open. Cold wind hit his face. Freedom. Not promised, not granted, taken. He slipped through the opening and into the darkness of the surrounding forest. Branches scratched his skin. Mud clung to his feet. The night swallowed him whole before the prison even realized it had lost its most important prisoner. But the story didn't end there. Shiratori's escape sparked a manhunt unlike anything Japan had seen. Posters were hung. Rewards were announced. Officers combed villages and mountains. They searched homes, fields, forests. They questioned fishermen, travelers, farmers. But Shiratori had something far stronger than a hiding place. He had motive. He knew he had been wrongfully condemned. He knew no one would fight for him, and he knew the only person who could prove his innocence was himself. But freedom outside the prison was not the freedom he hoped for. Villages mistrusted him. Storms nearly killed him. Hunger carved into his bones. He lived like a ghost, always watching, always listening, always surviving. And then in a twist of fate, he returned to society, only to be arrested again. Another prison, another sentence, another set of walls determined to break him. A Boshri prison, a fortress built to contain the most dangerous men in the country, a place where winter froze even the strongest spirits, a place where guards made it their mission to crush any spark of rebellion. If Omori prison was a cage, a Boshri was an execution done slowly. But even there they underestimated him. His cell was reinforced steel, meant for the worst. The windows were sealed, the bars were polished. Guards watched him like a hawk. But prison officials made one fatal mistake. They believed pain could destroy willpower. They starved him, beat him, chained him to the walls behind his back, left him in freezing temperatures.
But while his body weakened, his mind sharpened. He studied again. The hinges, the screws, the bolts, every metal joint that surrounded him. And one detail stood out. Cold temperature made the metal chains shrink. He used that. Night after night, his wrists bled as he twisted, pulled, forced the chain links to grind against each other. He endured frostbite. He endured agony. But in his mind, pain was temporary. Freedom was permanent. One night, during a snowstorm so brutal even guards struggled to stay awake, the chains finally gave way. He didn't hesitate. He dislocated his own shoulder to slip free of the restraints. Then, with the precision of a man who refused to die in captivity, he began analyzing the cell structure, eventually discovering a weakness no one else had ever noticed. The iron frame around the skylight. It wasn't welded, it wasn't reinforced, it was only nailed. He climbed toward it, body shaking from cold and exhaustion. The nails were old, rusty, and barely holding. Inch by inch, he pulled them free. Snow blew through the gaps, wind sliced across his skin. And with one final surge of strength, he lifted the entire frame away. Outside, the blizzard concealed everything, including him. He disappeared into the white darkness, again. Japan was stunned. 2 prison escapes from 2 of the most secure facilities, both executed by a man with no tools, no allies, no support, only resolve. Newspapers called him a genius, a phantom, a criminal mastermind, but people who heard the full story called him something else, a victim. A man who didn't escape because he was guilty, but because he knew remaining inside meant dying with his truth unheard. Years passed and he continued running until finally a twist changed everything. When he was eventually captured again, something unexpected happened. A judge listened. For the first time, someone saw him not as a criminal, but as a human being fighting for justice. His sentence was reduced. His treatment was improved.
and for the first time in his long and painful journey, Shiratari felt the world shift even slightly in his favor. But life had already carved its story inside him. It had shaped him into a man who challenged fate itself, a man who refused to surrender his freedom, dignity, or truth, a man who turned prisons into puzzles and escape into art. And long after he passed away, his legend lived on, a reminder that some cages are made of steel, but others are made of injustice. And the hardest to escape are the ones built around a person who refused to be heard. Because sometimes freedom isn't the opposite of captivity. Sometimes freedom is proof that a man's spirit can be chained, but never owned.